Our overarching goal in general should be to provide more objective, evidence-based decision-making in healthcare. And to do this effectively, we have to understand our environments and how we're making decisions. If you think about yourself as an individual, are you thinking through about how you're making decisions? Because the decision-making process in general is very multidimensional. Often how you might make a decision on one thing might be very different than how you might make a decision on something else. But thinking about it as in terms of your own decision-making process is very important. So sitting through and thinking, do you evaluate your own decision-making process? And do you evaluate and really understand your decision-making process when it comes to healthcare or specific policies regarding your institution's initiatives? And then this is a question I think we often ask ourselves when we think about decision-making, specifically in the realm when we start to think about the methodology to think about it more objectively, is that you have to constantly ask yourself, are your decisions evidence-based? This is a common question that we have when we think about clinical decisions, and we think about, are we recommending something based off of the clinical evidence, and is that data evidence-based? Now, with the topic of decisions, this book, I go into detail because it is very important as a very general framework and base for thinking about resource allocation. It's the whole decision-making process. And if you see on the right here, there's that whole list of decision criteria, decision models, decision questions, decision rules, decision trees, which goes into the methodology of decision-making, as well as thinking about who the decision makers are. So in the book, I go into detail about the various different types of decision makers within healthcare and how it's important to recognize who those are and how diverse they are. I think too, if we even look at the audience right now that we have, people come from very diverse backgrounds and they hold different positions, and they each are decision makers at different points of the healthcare process. So that's very important. Then when we think about, I'm here telling you to think about your own decision-making process. So in the book, I also talk about I also incorporate a decision-making questionnaire, which allows you to evaluate your own decision-making process as well as your institutions. But we'll get into the book in a little bit. But that's just to give you an idea of how important it is when we think about resource scarcity and then decision-making process before we start getting into what are these types of analyses, why we need to think about that.